The elevator doors opened to the sterile brightness of the surgical floor. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion, the kind that clung to every corridor of this hospital. Dr. Elias Ward adjusted the lanyard around his neck, the ID card swaying lightly as he stepped out. His shift had officially ended an hour ago, but that didn't matter. There was still one patient left he couldn't walk away from. Room 412. Patient: Daniel H., 46, male. Diagnosis: Stage 4 glioblastoma terminal. Prognosis: less than 3 months. Daniel's wife, Mara, sat by the bedside, her fingers tracing the rhythm of the monitor's beeps. She looked up when Elias entered, her face pale but her eyes burning with that dangerous kind of hope, the one that refuses to die even when reason says it should. "You said you'd talk to the board," she whispered. "Please tell me they agreed." Elias closed the door gently. "They didn't," her lips trembled. "But the therapy, it's not approved yet. Not by the FDA, not by our ethics committee. It hasn't cleared phase 3 trials." His voice was steady, professional, but the words felt heavier than they should. "I'm sorry." She stood, anger flaring through her grief. "You're sorry? You're a doctor, you save lives. How can you just stand there and do nothing while he dies?" Elias didn't answer. There was no answer that wouldn't sound cruel. Later, in the on-call room, the fluorescent light flickered above him as he stared at the ceiling. The hospital hummed around him, pagers buzzing, stretchers rolling, murmurs of coded urgency. It was the sound of a system that didn't stop for anyone. He had been here for 10 years. 10 years of protocols, checklists, forms, and quiet deaths. He learned that medicine wasn't just about healing. It was about boundaries, the lines you couldn't cross, no matter how much you wanted to. And yet, he could still hear Mara's voice. "You're a doctor, you save lives." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages until he found one from Dr. Ana Ruiz, his colleague in oncology. "Still thinking about Daniel H. Don't. You'll burn yourself out again." He typed, deleted, typed again. What if there's a way? He didn't send it. The next morning, during rounds, Elias avoided room 412. Instead, he stood before the glass window of the ICU, watching a resident insert a central line under supervision. Behind him, Dr. Porter, the chief of medicine, approached, tall, confident, her words always perfectly measured. "Ward," she said, "you're off tonight. You look like you need it." He nodded, but she wasn't finished. "And stay away from that glioblastoma case. I heard you've been emotionally involved. It's not good for your objectivity." He smiled politely, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 arguments. Understood. When she left, the hallway felt colder. Emotionally involved. The phrase echoed in his head. Was caring about a patient a weakness now? That night, Elias sat in the research wing long after everyone else had gone home. The dim blue glow of the monitors reflected off the glass vials in the refrigeration units. On his desk lay a file labeled Trial 73B, Gene-Targeted Immunotherapy Unapproved, the same one Mara had mentioned. He'd read the studies, the outcomes, the side effects. Some patients had shown miraculous regression. Others had suffered catastrophic organ failure. He whispered to himself, 12 out of 20 survived. He wasn't supposed to have access to the formula, but he did. Ana had worked on the preliminary trials overseas before the project was shut down. A part of him wanted to destroy the file, burn the temptation before it consumed him. Another part wanted to fight, to save Daniel, to prove that compassion didn't have to bow to bureaucracy. He closed his eyes. In his mind, the hospital rules blurred into one endless line, the gray line. 2 days later, Daniel's vitals deteriorated sharply. Blood pressure plummeting, intracranial pressure rising. The ICU nurses moved with precision, their faces expressionless, routine in crisis. Mara clung to Elias's sleeve as alarms wailed. "Please," she said again, the same word, but this time it was raw and broken. "Please, you can't let him go like this." Elias looked at the monitors, numbers dropping, a heart losing its rhythm. In his chest, something snapped. Prepare 10 milligrams of mannitol, he ordered, and page Dr. Ruiz now. He didn't even realize what he was doing until it was already done. Ana arrived moments later, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. What's happening? I'm considering compassionate use, Elias said quietly. Trial 73B, Ana froze. You can't be serious. You'd lose your license. He's dying, and if it fails, you'll kill him faster. Elias turned to her. If you were in that bed, would you want your doctor to follow the rulebook or try everything? Her silence was answer enough. Hours later, the ICU lights dimmed to night mode. Elias entered room 412 with a small vial hidden under his coat. His hands trembled. Mara stood at the door, her tears dry now she had no more left to give. Are you sure? She whispered. No, he admitted. But I can't do nothing. The drug entered Daniel's line, drop by drop. A clear liquid that looked no different from saline. But Elias knew the weight of what it carried: risk, hope, defiance. He stayed there through the night, watching the monitors. Every beep felt like judgment. Every silence felt like a sin. At dawn, the heart monitor steadied. Oxygen saturation rose. The tumor swelling had reduced slightly, imperceptible to the untrained eye, but enough for him to see it. Enough for hope to breathe again. He exhaled, shaking, a whisper escaping him. It's working. But as the sun touched the blinds, a nurse entered with a clipboard and froze. Her eyes darted to the unauthorized vials still on the counter. Dr. Ward, she said slowly. What is that? Elias met her gaze. The silence between them lasted a lifetime. By noon, whispers had spread through the department. Unauthorized medication, breach of protocol, violation of ethics. Dr. Porter called him into her office. The blinds were half drawn, light cutting sharp lines across the floor. Is it true? She asked. Elias didn't deny it. He was dying. I did what I had to. You went behind the board. Behind me. You administered an experimental drug without clearance. It saved him. For now, she said coldly. You've compromised the integrity of this institution. Do you understand what that means? He did. He also knew that, for the first time in years, he had done something that felt right. I became a doctor to save lives, he said quietly. Not to fill out forms. Porter's expression didn't change. You're suspended. Effective immediately, as he left her office, the hallway stretched endlessly ahead, filled with faces he'd known for years but couldn't read anymore. Some looked away. Others stared with quiet admiration. The world had shifted and he stood somewhere between hero and criminal. When he reached the exit, his phone buzzed. A message from Ana. Daniel's vitals are stable. MRI shows tumor regression. I don't know what this means, but it's real. He stopped walking. The world outside was waking up. Morning light, distant sirens, the rhythm of another day. For a long time, he just stood there, caught between relief and dread. Maybe he had saved a life. Maybe he had ruined his own. Either way, he had crossed the line. The hospital's ethics board convened on the 5th floor, a room of glass walls and quiet judgment. Dr. Elias Ward sat at the end of the long oak table, a single folder in front of him. Across from him, Chief Porter leafed through pages as if searching for something that might justify her disappointment. Beside her, the compliance officer took notes without expression. Every tap of the pen echoed louder than the ticking clock on the wall. Dr. Ward, Porter began, her tone clipped. You are aware this meeting is to determine whether your actions regarding patient Daniel H. constitute a violation of hospital policy, medical ethics, and potentially federal law. Elias's voice was low. I'm aware. Porter leaned forward. You administered an unapproved experimental drug without authorization, documentation, or informed consent. That's not true, he said. I had the wife's consent, not legal consent, she corrected sharply. Not written, not processed, not filed. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Then the compliance officer looked up. Dr. Ward, is it correct that you falsified documentation to indicate patient consent retroactively? Elias's throat went dry. No, he said, but the pause before it betrayed him. When the meeting adjourned, Elias felt the world tilt slightly off axis. The hallway outside the boardroom looked the same sterile white, same fluorescent hum, but it no longer felt like his world. Every door, every chart, every face carried weight now. He'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Ana Ruiz caught up to him outside the elevator. What happened? She asked. They're suspending me pending review, he said flatly. She sighed. You knew this was coming. What I didn't know, he said, was that doing the right thing could feel this wrong. Ana hesitated. Sometimes right and legal aren't the same thing. He looked at her, tired. You sound like me. Maybe I've been around you too long. Later that night, Ana sat alone in her office, staring at Daniel's latest scans. The tumor had shrunk measurably, undeniably. It wasn't a fluke. It was progress. She felt a spark of excitement, the kind that had driven her into medicine in the first place. But beneath it was fear. The data meant hope, but also exposure. If the board discovered that she had known about the treatment even if she hadn't administered it, her career would be collateral damage. Her phone buzzed. Mara H., can we meet tomorrow? I need to understand what happens next. Ana typed back, of course. Patient lounge. She closed the screen, exhaled, and whispered into the empty room. We're all in this now. The next morning, the hospital was unusually quiet. Rain streaked the windows, turning the parking lot outside into a mirrored blur. Ana arrived early to review Daniel's file one more time. She noticed something odd: an unsigned consent form dated 2 days before the procedure. Elias's signature was there, but the patient's line was blank. It wasn't in the system. It had been scanned and manually filed under a temporary research code. A chill ran through her. She wasn't the only one who'd seen it. When she looked up, Porter was standing in the doorway. Dr. Ruiz, she said softly, I trust you understand the gravity of falsifying documentation. I didn't say you did, Porter interrupted. But I know Dr. Ward didn't do this alone. Ana swallowed. Are you accusing me? I'm asking, Porter said. Because if you're covering for him, you'll go down with him. You've got potential, Ana. Don't throw it away for someone who's already sinking. Porter's words were clinical, almost kind, but they landed like a threat. In the patient lounge, Mara sat by the window, her husband asleep beside her. Daniel looked almost peaceful now, paler, thinner, but breathing steadily. Machines hummed around him like guardians. When Ana entered, Mara stood immediately. Is it true? She asked. They're punishing Dr. Ward for saving my husband? Ana hesitated. The hospital has rules, Mrs. H. So saving lives breaks the rules now? Mara's voice cracked. He gave me hope. You both did. And now they want to destroy him. Ana looked at Daniel. The monitors blinked in rhythm, his numbers stable. He did what he thought was right. And you? Mara asked. Do you think it was right? Ana didn't answer. Downstairs, Elias sat on a bench outside the staff exit. His badge no longer opened the doors upstairs. The security guard had been polite. Sorry, doctor, orders from above. He stared at the rain dripping from the eaves. For the first time in years, he wasn't a doctor. He was a man who'd broken the rules, waiting to see whether the world would punish him or thank him. The door opened behind him. Ana stepped out, holding an umbrella. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you, he replied. You're supposed to stay away from suspended staff, then arrest me, she said quietly, sitting beside him. They sat in silence, the sound of rain filling the gaps words couldn't bridge. Did you falsify the form? She asked finally. He didn't look at her. It needed to look official. I filled in the date, that's all. That's not all, she said. That's enough to ruin you, maybe. But it's also enough to protect Mara. She didn't sign under pressure. I did it after she said yes. It just wasn't on paper. Ana studied him. Do you regret it? He shook his head slowly. No, do you? She hesitated. Ask me after the board hearing. 3 days later, word spread that the hospital's legal team had launched a formal inquiry. Someone, likely Porter, had escalated the issue to the state board. An ethics investigator would arrive by the end of the week. Rumors multiplied like infections. Some said Elias had falsified multiple records. Others said he'd stolen the drug. Others still whispered that the hospital had covered up similar incidents before. No one knew the truth, but everyone wanted a version that made sense. Anna found herself at the center of the storm. Nurses who used to smile at her now avoided eye contact. A junior resident asked if she'd be next. By Friday, her inbox overflowed with legal memos and interview requests. And through it all, Daniel kept improving. The investigator arrived on a gray morning. His name was Michael Lerner, quiet, mid-40s, polite in the way that people are when they're recording everything. He interviewed staff one by one. When Anna's turn came, she sat across from him in the small consultation room. A recorder blinked red on the table. "Dr. Ruiz," he began, "you were present during portions of patient Daniel H.'s treatment?" "Yes." "You were aware of Dr. Ward's decision to administer the unapproved drug?" "I was informed after he made the decision. Did you report it?" She hesitated. "No, why not?" Anna took a deep breath. "Because I believed he acted in the patient's best interest. He wrote something down." "Did you assist in falsifying the consent form?" "No, but you knew it existed?" She paused again. "I didn't destroy it, if that's what you're asking." Lerner looked up, eyes unreadable. "That's exactly what I'm asking." By the time Lerner left, Anna felt hollow. The hospital's walls seemed closer, the air heavier. In the corridor, she caught sight of Porter speaking to two men in suits, administrators, lawyers, the kind of people who turned moral questions into paperwork. She turned away. She didn't want to hear her own name on their lips. That evening, she visited Daniel one last time. Mara was asleep in the chair beside his bed, a blanket over her shoulders. The monitors glowed softly in the dim light. Daniel stirred, opened his eyes. "Doctor," he murmured weakly. "How bad is it?" Anna forced a smile. "You're improving. That's all that matters." He shook his head slowly. "No, I mean, for him, for Dr. Ward." Her throat tightened. "He'll be okay. Tell him." "Thank you," Daniel whispered, before drifting back into sleep. Anna stood there for a long time, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened her email drafts. The subject line read, "Ray, Clinical Data Trial 73B. Inside was a detailed summary of Daniel's progress, lab results, MRI scans, blood markers, everything that proved the treatment had worked. She hovered over send. Her career, her reputation, everything she had built rested on what she did next. If she sent it, she'd be confirming the use of an unauthorized drug, implicating herself in a protocol breach. If she deleted it, the data and the chance to legitimize the treatment would disappear into silence. She closed her eyes, then hit send. The next morning, the hospital erupted in chaos. The leaked data had reached the research network. By noon, 3 national institutions had requested the anonymized report. By evening, reporters were calling. Headlines appeared online. "Experimental therapy shows promise in terminal cancer case. Anonymous doctor defies protocol, saves life." The administration panicked. Porter stormed into the oncology wing demanding answers. Anna was in her office, waiting. "You leaked it," Porter said flatly. Anna didn't deny it. "The world deserves to know. You just admitted to a federal violation." "No," Anna said quietly. "I admitted to saving a life." Porter stared at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You're suspended." Effective immediately, outside, Elias watched the storm unfold from across the street. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the hospital, but he couldn't stay away. When he saw Anna escorted out by security, her white coat folded over her arm, he felt something twist inside him: pride, guilt, admiration, grief. He called after her. "Anna." She stopped, looked back. Rain started again, soft and relentless. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked. "I did what you started," she said. They stood there, soaked, the world collapsing quietly around them. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Elias said, Then maybe it was worth it, Anna smiled faintly. Ask me after they take our licenses. They both laughed, just once, a sound that felt half alive, half broken. That night, Mara received a call from an unknown number. A calm voice identified himself as Michael Lerner. Mrs. H, I wanted to let you know the investigation is ongoing. But your husband's case, it's opened a discussion far beyond this hospital. What kind of discussion? She asked. The kind that changes things, he said. Mara looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully beside her. Then maybe they did the right thing after all. Lerner didn't answer, but she thought she heard a smile in his silence. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing over the hospital's walls, erasing nothing, but softening everything. Inside, monitors beeped in steady rhythm, marking time for those who lived in the gray space between rule and mercy. The investigation hadn't ended, it had only evolved. 2 weeks after the data leak, the hospital board convened again, this time under tighter security and heavier silence. No reporters were allowed inside. Outside the glass entrance, protesters held signs that read, "Let doctors save lives, protocol kills patients, free Dr. Ward." Dr. Elias Ward watched the scene from a cafe across the street, hood pulled low. Every few minutes, he caught a reflection of himself in the window, tired eyes, unshaven, a man caught between heroism and ruin. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't answer. Lawyers, journalists, old friends from med school. Everyone wanted a statement, but he had none to give. He didn't know how to explain that doing the right thing had cost him the right to be a doctor. Inside the hospital, Dr. Ana Ruiz sat under the fluorescent glare of an interrogation room for the third time that week. The state medical board investigator, Michael Lerner, sat across from her with his calm, analytical gaze. A recorder blinked red between them. "You leaked confidential medical data," Lerner said, "not as an accusation but as a fact." "I released anonymized clinical results," Anna corrected. "There were no names attached." He raised an eyebrow. "You know that's not the issue." "I know," she said quietly. "But people are alive because someone broke a rule once." Lerner didn't respond immediately. He closed his notebook. "I read the oath you took when you graduated from Columbia, Dr. Ruiz. I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. You remember that part?" Anna nodded. He leaned forward. "Do you believe you upheld it?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Even if it cost me everything." He studied her face. "We'll see if the board agrees." Meanwhile, in the administrative wing, Chief Porter was under her own kind of scrutiny. Emails had leaked, not hers, but close enough. Internal messages suggesting that the hospital had known about previous unapproved treatments being tested under the radar. The press was circling like sharks. Every headline painted the institution as a cold machine choking on its own rules. Porter stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting the pin on her lapel. For years, she had believed order was the only way to keep chaos out of medicine. Rules saved lives, she thought. But lately, she wasn't so sure. She glanced at a folder on her desk. Internal review. Experimental drug access requests, 2018-2024. Names filled the list. More than one case had been denied and ended in death. When the phone rang, she jumped slightly. "Porter, Chief," said a voice on the other end. "We've got a situation." "It's Daniel H." Her heart sank. "What now?" "He's awake," the nurse said, and asking for Dr. Ward. Daniel had been improving steadily. MRI scans now showed a tumor reduction of nearly 80%. The medical community was calling it a miracle, but with recovery came awareness, and with awareness came questions. When Anna entered the room, Daniel was sitting up, pale but alert. His wife, Mara, was asleep in the corner again, exhausted from months of living beside beeping machines. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel said softly. "I'm still your doctor," she replied. "Not officially," he said. "I saw the news. They're calling you a criminal." Anna smiled faintly. "If that's true, you're my accomplice." He chuckled, then winced. "Do you ever wonder if you did the right thing?" "Every day," He looked down at his hands. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before, Anna frowned. What is it? It's about where I got the drug money. What do you mean? She asked carefully. He hesitated, voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't pay for it through the hospital's research fund. I made a deal. With who? Someone on the board, he said. They gave me access under the condition that if I survived, they'd get the credit. Anna's stomach dropped. Who? But Daniel shook his head weakly. I can't. They'll shut this place down. That night, Anna went home for the first time in days. Her apartment was dark, filled with unopened mail and half-drunk cups of coffee. She poured herself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and replayed Daniel's words in her mind. Someone on the board. If that was true, then Elias wasn't the only one who had crossed the line. Someone higher up had pulled the strings and left him to take the fall. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You don't know me, the voice said when she answered. But you're in danger, Dr. Ruiz. Who is this? Someone who knows what happens to doctors who dig too deep. The line went dead. At dawn, Anna drove back to the hospital. Security had already increased. New guards at the doors, ID checks at every turn. She slipped into the research wing through the basement, where few people went at that hour. On a shelf labeled Archive B, she found the paper trail she'd been looking for. Old requisition forms, signed and dated years before the scandal, identical to the one Elias had used. Different names, different doctors, the same experimental drug. She took photos of everything. Her hands trembled. These documents could prove that the hospital had used unapproved drugs before and covered it up each time. When she turned to leave, someone was standing in the doorway. Looking for ghosts? Porter's voice was calm, almost amused. Anna froze. You knew. I know everything that happens under my roof, Porter said. Including which doctors forget who they work for. People died because of these denials, Anna said. And you buried them. Porter took a step closer. Medicine isn't about justice, doctor. It's about survival for patients and for institutions. Anna stared at her. Then maybe this institution doesn't deserve to survive. By afternoon, the board meeting resumed. Cameras lined the hallway outside. Lerner sat beside the panel, his notes meticulous. Anna and Elias were both present, stripped of titles, dressed in civilian clothes, but still doctors in the way they held themselves. Proud, exhausted, unbowed. Porter opened the session. We are here to determine whether Dr. Ward and Dr. Ruiz have violated medical ethics, federal law, and their professional oaths. Elias stood. Before you begin, he said, you should know something. Dr. Ward, no, he said firmly. You've had your say. Now you'll hear mine. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were the photos Anna had taken. These are requisition forms from 2019 and 2021. The same drug, the same protocol, approved quietly by someone on this board. Patients treated under compassionate exceptions. Their files vanished when they died. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, confusion, denial, outrage. Porter sat perfectly still. Lerner opened the folder, scanning the pages. His expression shifted: interest, disbelief, then understanding. Where did you get these? From your archives, Anna said. You've been using us as scapegoats. Porter's voice was steady. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then explain it, Elias said. Explain why you buried the data. Explain why no one else was allowed to try. Porter didn't answer. The silence was its own confession. By evening, chaos had spread beyond the hospital walls. Reporters had somehow obtained copies of the documents. Headlines flashed across every screen. Hospital Ethics Board under investigation for secret drug trials. Whistleblower doctors expose corruption. Elias and Anna became reluctant symbols, not criminals now, but martyrs in the court of public opinion. Neither of them wanted the attention. They just wanted to heal people. But once you light a fire in the dark, you can't control what burns. That night, Lerner visited Anna at her apartment. He stood by the window, rain pattering softly against the glass. You understand what you've done? He asked. I told the truth, he nodded. The truth has consequences, always has, she said. But maybe this time, they'll be worth it. Lerner looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, you should know the board's collapsing. Porter's resigned. The hospital's lawyers are already negotiating plea deals. Anna sank into a chair. What about Elias? Lerner hesitated. They might reinstate him. She smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. Justice then? Maybe, he said. Or maybe just the illusion of it. The next morning, Elias returned to the hospital for the first time as a free man. His badge still didn't work, the system hadn't caught up yet, but the security guard waved him through anyway. In the corridor, a few nurses clapped softly. Others just nodded, eyes shining. He found Daniel sitting up, unhooked from most of the machines, reading a paperback. When he saw Elias, he smiled. They say I'm a miracle. You are, Elias said. You don't look happy about it, Elias sighed. I'm just tired. Daniel closed the book. You did what you swore to do, doctor. You saved a life, Elias looked at him, and nearly destroyed everything else. Daniel shook his head. You didn't destroy anything. You reminded them what it means to take an oath. Elias smiled, just a little. Funny. I thought I'd broken it. Maybe, Daniel said softly. But maybe it needed breaking. That night, alone in his apartment, Elias stood by the window watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold. Somewhere out there, people were debating his choices, ethics professors, pundits, policymakers. But none of that mattered now. He had crossed the line, yes, but in doing so, he had redrawn it not just for himself, but for everyone who came after. He poured a glass of whiskey, lifted it in a quiet toast to no one, and whispered to the empty room, to the oath. May it mean something again. The first thing to collapse wasn't the hospital. It was trust. 2 weeks after Chief Porter's resignation, the building still buzzed like a wounded organism, lights flickering, elevators stalling, whispers replacing conversation. Administrators were replaced by interim committees. Signs of protest were gone, but the echo of them remained in the cracks of the lobby tiles. Dr. Elias Ward had returned, technically reinstated, though no one quite knew what to do with him. He had no department, no patients assigned, no authority. His nameplate had been removed from the door. When he passed colleagues in the hallway, some smiled out of loyalty, others turned away as if guilt were contagious. He wasn't bitter, just tired. In the cafeteria, he sat alone with his coffee, watching rain smear the glass. A nurse approached Lena, one of the ICU staff from Daniel's case. I heard they're reopening oncology, she said quietly. Under a new director, he nodded. That'll make the lawyers happy. They want you to stay on. As what? A symbol? She hesitated. As someone who still believes in the work, he smiled faintly. Belief got me into this mess. She sat across from him anyway. You know, patients ask about you. Some call you the doctor who saved the man the system gave up on. Others think you're reckless. I think, maybe you're both, maybe, he said. Maybe that's what being human looks like. Across the city, in a downtown boardroom overlooking a skyline of glass and fog, the hospital's legal team met with state investigators. Lerner was there, still calm, still methodical. The board is prepared to cooperate fully, said the hospital's attorney. We've provided documentation of all experimental treatments dating back 5 years. Lerner flipped through the files. 5 years isn't enough. We have patient deaths unaccounted for from earlier trials. If you want leniency, you'll need transparency. The lawyer shifted in his seat. You're asking us to open graves, Mr. Lerner. Lerner looked up, his tone even. Sometimes that's the only way to stop burying the truth. Ana Ruiz had taken an unpaid leave. Officially, it was for personal reflection. Unofficially, it was because she'd had nowhere left to stand. The media had twisted her into a narrative, the defiant whistleblower, the ethical rebel, the woman who broke medicine to save it. She hated every word of it. At night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of patients she'd lost, the quiet ones who trusted her without question. Their ghosts sat at the edge of her bed. She tried to drown them out with work analyzing the data from Daniel's recovery, writing reports, answering inquiries from research institutes around the world. One evening, her inbox pinged with a message from an unknown sender. Subject: Clinical Data Review Confidential. We're interested in reproducing your trial under institutional approval. Funding available. International collaboration possible. Are you ready to continue what you started? She stared at the screen. Continue. The word both thrilled and terrified her. She typed a reply, then stopped. Her cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Finally, she closed the laptop. Not yet. Back at the hospital, the corridors felt thinner. Every conversation paused when Elias walked by. Not because people hated him, but because they didn't know what to say. Gratitude and resentment coexisted uneasily. One afternoon, he entered the old oncology ward, his ward now stripped bare. The walls smelled of fresh paint, as if the administration thought color could erase memory. He ran his hand over the empty counter where Daniel's chart once sat. He heard footsteps behind him. Anna, I thought you were gone, he said without turning. I was. I came back for my files. They stood in silence for a moment. Dust floated in the sunlight cutting through the blinds. Do you ever regret it? She asked. All the time, he said. But not the act, the cost, she nodded. They called me last week. Some research group wants to restart the trial under legal protocols. That's good. They want me to lead it, he turned. Will you? I don't know. It feels wrong to profit from something that destroyed so many lives. Elias studied her. Maybe the best way to honor the damage is to make it mean something. She smiled faintly. You sound like someone who still believes. Someone has to, he said. Outside the hospital, cameras still gathered occasionally. Reporters called the scandal the Gray Line case. Public opinion was split. Some saw it as a story of courage, others of recklessness. Lawmakers debated new guidelines for compassionate use treatments. Inside, the staff struggled with their own versions of morality. Dr. Patel, once a loyal administrator, resigned quietly after his name surfaced in the old requisition forms. A junior nurse was dismissed for leaking internal memos to journalists. Departments were reorganized. Budgets froze. Research funding vanished overnight. The collateral damage wasn't just professional. Marriages cracked under stress. Friendships dissolved. Some doctors left medicine altogether. Others stayed out of guilt, trying to rebuild what had been broken. Medicine had always been about triage, deciding who could be saved. Now, the hospital itself was the patient on the table, bleeding from a dozen invisible wounds. Elias spent his days doing small things. Covering night shifts for residents who needed rest, reading scans for cases no one else wanted, sitting with families in the ICU long after visiting hours ended. It was the only way he could make peace with himself through small acts of quiet repair. One night, he found himself back in room 412. Daniel's bed was empty now, replaced by a new patient, a young woman post-transplant, fighting rejection. Her mother stood at the window, face illuminated by moonlight. You're the doctor from the news, she said softly when she recognized him. I was, he said. They said you broke the law, he nodded. I did, but you saved him, didn't you? He looked at the monitor beeping steadily. Yes, I did, she smiled faintly. Then maybe the law was wrong. Her words lingered long after he left the room. Weeks passed. The hospital adapted, as hospitals always do. New leaders, new slogans, same ghosts. The scandal slowly shifted from headlines to footnotes, from outrage to policy, but the people who lived through it carried it in their bones. Anna eventually accepted the research offer not out of ambition, but out of obligation. She knew if she didn't lead the new trial, someone else would, someone who might forget the lessons written in blood. Before she left, she met Elias one last time at a cafe near the hospital. They cleared your name, she said. Officially, he smiled tiredly. Doesn't feel like it. They're offering you a teaching position, he chuckled. Perfect. I can warn the next generation not to do what I did. She stirred her coffee. Maybe warn them to do it better. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that lives between exhaustion and healing. Where will you go? He asked. Geneva, she said. To start again. Somewhere the rules make more sense. And you? Here, he said. Someone has to clean up. She reached across the table, touched his hand. We did the right thing, Elias. Even if no one thanks us for it. He looked at her, eyes soft. They don't have to. A month later, the hospital unveiled a new ethics policy, one shaped by everything they had endured. It was pragmatic, imperfect, but real. The first line of the document read, "When the law fails to protect life, the physician must weigh conscience against compliance and bear the burden of either choice." Elias stood at the back of the auditorium as the new director read the statement aloud. No one knew he was there. He didn't want to be applauded. He just wanted to listen. When the speech ended, the crowd applauded. For once, the sound didn't feel hollow. He stepped outside into the sunlight. The city buzzed, cars honking, people rushing, life moving on, indifferent yet beautiful. He closed his eyes and let the warmth settle on his face. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a criminal or a martyr, just a doctor again. A man who'd crossed a line and somehow found his way back. That evening, Anna called from Geneva. The connection crackled. First day in the lab, she said. We're naming the new trial protocol after Daniel. Elias smiled. He'd like that. You sound better, she said. I am. There was a pause. Then Anna's voice softened. You know, every generation needs someone to break the rules just enough to remind the rest why the rules exist. Maybe, he said. But next time, I hope they learn without burning everything down. Hope, she said. That's a good start. They said goodbye. Elias hung up, stepped onto his balcony, and watched the horizon fade into twilight. Somewhere in the city, sirens wailed the eternal pulse of emergency. He thought of the patients still inside that hospital, of the people who'd fight the same battles long after he was gone. He whispered to the dark, do no harm, even when it hurts, and for the first time in a long time, he believed it again. Silence had returned to the hospital, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that hums under the surface, the kind that carries secrets, half-truths, and the weight of things left unsaid. The scandal was officially over. The hospital had survived, reborn under new leadership and new rules. Chief Porter had resigned, Dr. Ward had been reinstated as a lecturer, and Dr. Ruiz had gone abroad to continue her research. The headlines had faded into the archives of digital memory, but inside these walls, the aftermath had taken root. Every corridor whispered. The new order 6 months after the hearings, a new director, Dr. Raymond Heller, took charge. Heller was known for his calm efficiency, a man who smiled without warmth and spoke in memorized sound bites. Transparency, trust, renewal, those were the words he repeated in every meeting. He introduced an internal motto. The patient comes first, but the protocol comes second only to the patient. It sounded noble, but no one knew what it meant. Some saw it as reform, others as a clever illusion of change. Departments were rearranged, committees renamed, but the people remained the same, the ones who had lived through the chaos. Their faith had cracks now. Their loyalty came with conditions. They called the new oncology wing the Whisper Ward. The name began as a joke among nurses because secrets seemed to live there, but it spread, and soon, even doctors used it without irony. Patients overheard it and wondered what it meant. No one explained. The return of the ghost Elias Ward rarely went near the Whisper Ward anymore. He lectured now medical ethics, of all things. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Some of his students whispered about his past, others idolized him. He accepted both reactions with quiet grace. His lectures filled quickly. He spoke not from books, but from scars. Ethics, he told them one afternoon, isn't about right or wrong. It's about deciding which wrong you can live with. After class, a student lingered. Clara, a second-year resident assigned to oncology. Dr. Ward, she said, hesitating, something's happening in the ward. I think you should know. He frowned. What do you mean? There's a patient experimental treatment again. Same compound as before, but no documentation. Just quiet orders from administration. Elias felt a chill. That drug was banned for use without federal clearance. Clara nodded. I know, but someone authorized it. They said it's part of a shadow trial, and they're saying your name's on the requisition list. His pulse quickened. That's impossible. I thought you'd say that, she whispered. That's why I came to you. The shadow trial he spent that night in the hospital archives. Old habits die hard. The security staff still let him in respect or pity. He wasn't sure which. He searched under project codes, not names. After hours of scrolling through encrypted files, he found it. Trial 73C, Gene-Targeted Immunotherapy Confidential Use, Phase 4 off record. His name was indeed listed as consultant of record, but he hadn't signed anything. The digital signature had been cloned from an older approval. Someone had resurrected the therapy and attached his name to it. He printed the file, hands shaking slightly. At the bottom of the document was a new signature, one he recognized. Dr. Raymond Heller. The nurse's confession the next morning, Elias visited the Whisper ward. It looked different now, brighter walls, new monitors, the sterile smell of investment. But the tension was the same. Nurses moved efficiently, eyes lowered, voices low. He found Clara near the nurses' station. She led him to room 418. A young man lay inside, pale but conscious, and 4-line running to a machine labeled with a new code. Immunovector 2.1. Elias read the name tag. Noah R., 29, advanced lymphoma. Who approved this? He asked quietly. Clara glanced around. Heller's office. They said it's part of an international partnership with Geneva. That's Dr. Ruiz's lab, isn't it? Elias froze. Anna, she's cited in the documentation, Clara said, but there's no signature, just her initials. He felt the air thin. Get me everything you can discreetly, she nodded, but her eyes betrayed fear. They've been warning us not to talk about this. Nurses who ask questions get reassigned. Reassigned where? The basement records department, she said. No sunlight, no noise. Everyone calls it the morgue for careers. The letter from Geneva that night, Elias emailed Anna. He didn't expect her to reply quickly, but she did, within an hour. Elias, the last protocol I signed was months ago. If they're using my data, it's without authorization. Be careful. You're not the only one they can scapegoat again. He stared at the screen. Geneva had been her sanctuary, but now even that had been pulled into the hospital's quiet machinery. Someone was building on their discovery secretly, illegally, and hiding it behind old ghosts. He thought of Heller's practice smile, his rehearsed words about renewal. Renewal was just another word for erasure. The whispers spread within days. Rumors turned to panic. Staff whispered of missing files, falsified authorizations, and anonymous meetings after hours. Someone claimed to have seen Porter returning at night, speaking with Heller. Others swore it was Lerner himself, consulting for the board now. Truth dissolved into noise. One morning, Elias found a note slipped under his office door. They're watching you. Room 418 isn't the only one. No signature, just a fingerprint smudge in ink. That afternoon, Noah R.E.'s condition worsened: rapid organ failure, sudden respiratory collapse. The trial drug had triggered a cascade reaction. Elias rushed to the ward uninvited, but no one stopped him. Nurses stepped aside instinctively. Who authorized this dosage? He demanded. A young researcher looked up, terrified. Dr. Heller gave the order. Where is he? In his office, she whispered. With legal, the confrontation. Elias didn't knock. The door slammed open. Heller was at his desk, 2 lawyers seated across from him, the smell of expensive coffee filling the air. You cloned my signature, Elias said, voice steady. Heller leaned back. I authorized continuation of a promising therapy. Your name carries weight. It helps the review board move faster. You killed a patient, one patient, Heller said coldly. We've saved others. Elias stepped forward, fury barely contained. You used our work mine on us as camouflage for your ambition. Heller smiled faintly. Don't be naive, doctor. Medicine is built on ambition. Without it, progress dies. Without ethics, so does humanity, Elias said. The lawyers rose, sensing the tension. Dr. Ward, I'd advise your client to stop pretending he's saving lives, Elias snapped. He's just managing statistics. Heller's composure cracked for the first time. Be careful, Ward. You think the last scandal hurt this place? You leak this, and it collapses for good. Patients die because of your righteousness. Elias met his gaze. Patients die because of your pride. He left without another word. The collapse within 48 hours, Noah R. was dead. Official cause, multi-organ failure. Unofficially, everyone knew. Another experimental casualty. Another ghost for the Whisper Ward. The staff stopped speaking altogether. Conversations ended when doors opened. Eyes avoided one another. The rumor that Elias had reported Heller to the press spread faster than the truth, but he hadn't not yet. He was tired of destruction. He didn't want another war. Still, when he received a message from Lerner 2 days later, he knew it had begun again. Meet me. PM parking level B. Come alone. The parking garage was half lit, half shadow. Lerner stood beside a column, coat collar turned up, his expression unreadable. You're not supposed to contact me, Elias said. Neither are you supposed to be listed on active trials, Lerner replied. Yet here we are, Elias exhaled. He's doing it again, off-record treatments, falsified signatures. Heller's behind it, I know, Lerner said. But this time, you're not the whistleblower. What do you mean? This time, they're using you as bait, Elias frowned. Bait for what? For her, Lerner said. Dr. Ruiz. Geneva just cut funding after they traced unauthorized data transfers from her lab. Someone's setting her up too. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. She has nothing to do with this. They don't care, Lerner said. They just need someone to take the fall when this hits the press. The silence between them stretched. Above them, thunder rolled through the night like distant machinery. The new line later that night, Elias sat in his car, engine off, rain tapping against the windshield. He could see the hospital through the storm, the tall, bright building, shining like a lighthouse over a sea of lies. He had once believed that crossing the ethical line was the hardest thing a doctor could do. He was wrong. The hardest thing was realizing the line keeps moving. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank message, and typed, "To Anna, they're coming for you. Don't trust anyone connected to Heller." He hit send, then leaned back, eyes closed. Somewhere inside the hospital, another alarm sounded. Another patient coding. Another secret dying quietly behind glass walls. In the Whisper Ward, the monitors hummed their mechanical lullaby. Nurses moved like ghosts. Somewhere in a corner office, Heller stared at a single line of data on his screen, proof that the drug worked, if only barely. He smiled, not out of triumph but out of certainty. Progress always demanded sacrifice. And somewhere far away, in a Geneva laboratory bathed in sterile white light, Dr. Ana Ruiz read Elias's message. Her hand trembled slightly. She looked out at the snow falling over the city, the weight of the past pressing against the present. She whispered to herself, "It's happening again," and for the first time since leaving, she was afraid. The air in the hospital was thick again, that quiet heaviness that settles before something irreversible happens. 6 months had passed since the scandal had resurfaced, but the tension hadn't faded. It had only changed shape. Everyone called it the trial. Not the courtroom kind, the kind that takes place in hallways, in glances, in whispers. The kind that tests not guilt or innocence, but endurance. Dr. Elias Ward had become both legend and warning. Students quoted his lectures on ethics. Administrators cited his downfall in policy training. He existed in a strange purgatory, not fired, not trusted, not free. On the morning the investigators returned, he felt it before anyone told him. The silence in the corridors was too deliberate. The air smelled like coffee and fear. When he entered the staff lounge, A nurse quickly folded a newspaper. He didn't need to see the headline. He already knew. Hospital under renewed investigation. Unauthorized trials linked to former ethics scandal. The ghosts had returned. The international inquiry began quietly. At first, it was just paperwork, emails from Geneva, cross-reference trial data, questions about encrypted patient files. Then came the agents. They didn't wear scrubs or badges. They wore dark suits, pressed and patient, and they walked like men who already knew the answers. Every file they opened seemed to lead back to the same place, Trial 73C, the new version of the therapy, the one run by Dr. Raymond Heller. Elias's name appeared again and again on the authorizations. His digital signature, his credentials, all falsified. He confronted Heller in his office, but the man only smiled, that same calm, rehearsed smile that never reached his eyes. "Your name carries weight, Ward," Heller said. "It opens doors. You forged my approval. I used your reputation," Heller corrected. "That's not a crime. It's strategy. You killed another patient." "One," Heller said quietly. "For the chance to save hundreds." Elias stared at him. "That's not medicine. That's mathematics." Heller leaned back. "Call it whatever you want. History doesn't remember who followed the rules. It remembers who changed them." Elias turned and left before he said something he couldn't take back. A week later, summons arrived. Formal hearings, federal oversight, media coverage already circling like vultures. Ana Ruiz was called back from Geneva. Her name had been found in the research logs, not her full signature, just initials. But that was enough to drag her into the storm. The night she landed, she found Elias waiting at the hospital entrance. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," he replied. They stood for a moment, silent, the air between them heavy with everything unspoken, the shared guilt, the tired loyalty, the memory of what they'd built and lost. "What did they tell you?" she asked. "That I'm the reason it happened again," he said. "And you?" "That I funded it from Geneva." Elias frowned. "You didn't." She shook her head. "No, but they don't care." The hearing room was colder than he remembered. The long table, the microphones, the stale air of bureaucratic judgment, all of it too familiar. This time, though, it wasn't just the hospital board. It was federal investigators, auditors, and press representatives waiting outside for headlines. Chief Porter wasn't there. Heller sat in her old chair. "Dr. Ward," he began smoothly, "thank you for joining us voluntarily." Elias ignored the false politeness. "You used my credentials for unauthorized research," Heller smiled. "Allegedly." Lerner, now an independent investigator, watched from the side, silent but sharp. His presence meant things were serious. Elias placed a printed document on the table. "Trial 73C was registered under my name. This is the access log. The IP address traces back to your office." Heller's expression didn't change. "Logs can be altered. You of all people should know how fragile digital evidence is." Ana stepped forward. "Then explain this." She placed another file beside his. "Geneva's server received data uploads 3 weeks after I shut down my lab. From your hospital network. Using my encryption key." For the first time, Heller blinked. Lerner looked between them. "That's enough," he said quietly. "We'll handle this under review." But the damage was already done. That night, the story broke. New scandal. Former heroes accused in international medical cover-up. The headlines were merciless. Photos of Elias and Ana at the courthouse. Clips of Heller speaking to the press, all charm and rhetoric. "Innovation demands risk. I stand by my decisions." The hospital released a statement within hours. "We condemn any breach of ethics and will cooperate fully with authorities." It was the same sentence they'd issued years ago, word for word. In Geneva, Ana's research funding was suspended. Her lab was sealed pending investigation. In the hospital, Elias's lectures were cancelled. Students were quietly advised to seek alternate mentorship. He found himself alone again in the empty lecture hall, the smell of chalk and dust thick in the air. He thought of all the times he had told students that ethics was about gray lines, not black or white, but the space between. Now, even gray felt like a luxury. 3 days later, Lerner called him in. "They've traced everything," he said. "The accounts, the signatures, the internal memos. It's all Heller. But the prosecution wants more than guilt. They want a story, someone to carry the blame publicly." Elias nodded slowly. "And that's me, or her," Lerner said. "They'll take whichever name sells better. What happens if I talk? Then you go down with him." "But at least it'll be the truth." Elias smiled without humor. "You sound like Anna." Lerner closed the folder. "She's testifying tomorrow. She'll need you there." The courthouse was a blur of cameras and microphones. Protesters stood outside again, half holding signs of support, half shouting accusations. Inside, the hearing felt smaller than it should have. "Just a table, a handful of officials, and too many ghosts." Anna spoke first. Her voice didn't shake. She explained the data trail, the misuse of research, the corruption behind Heller's deals. She didn't try to protect herself. Then it was Elias's turn. He told them everything. The forged signatures, the manipulated files, the patient who died in silence. He ended with a single sentence that hung in the air long after he said it. "We wanted to save lives. Somewhere along the way, we forgot what life was worth." No one moved. Even Heller stayed still, his mask finally cracking. The next morning, news outlets reported it as redemption. Doctors speak out. Corruption exposed in final testimony. Heller was arrested that afternoon on charges of fraud and unlawful medical experimentation. He posted bail within hours, of course, but for once, his smile looked forced. The hospital's board announced a complete reorganization. Anna was cleared of misconduct but chose not to return. She left the next day for Geneva, determined to finish what she started legally this time. Elias stayed, not because he believed in the institution anymore, but because leaving would mean letting it rot. One evening, he walked past the Whisper ward. It was empty now, stripped of machines and beds. The walls had been repainted again, but he could still see the outlines where the equipment once stood. He stood there for a long time. Anna's words from the trial echoed in his mind. "Progress means nothing if it forgets the people it's meant to save," he whispered to the empty room. We remembered too late. Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky. Somewhere, sirens wailed another life in crisis, another choice waiting to be made. He adjusted his coat, stepped into the rain, and kept walking. He didn't know if what they had done would change anything, but for the first time, he felt something that resembled peace. Not because the trial was over, but because he finally understood the cost of truth. The hospital was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, only memory. After the trial, the world had moved on faster than anyone inside those walls could. Headlines faded, outrage cooled, and the internet found new scandals to consume. But for the people who had lived it, who had breathed its chaos, time didn't heal anything. It only sharpened the silence. Dr. Elias Ward returned to work, but not as before. He was no longer the ambitious surgeon who'd once defied the system. Now, he was the man who'd survived it. He lectured, supervised interns, filled forms, tasks that kept him busy enough to forget, but never long enough to escape. The Whisper ward remained sealed. No one dared reopen it. A heavy steel door separated the present from the past, and everyone was content to keep it that way. But the ghosts didn't stay behind the door. They followed him. Every time Elias walked the corridors, he heard them: echoes of monitors, fragments of voices, the rhythm of lives he couldn't save. Outside, autumn had turned the city gray. Rain slicked the pavement, and the hospital's glass facade reflected a skyline that seemed to collapse into itself. Elias had started walking home instead of driving. It helped to feel the weather. It reminded him he was still alive. Some evenings, he'd stop by the small cafe across the street, the same one where he'd once watched protests and news crews crowd the hospital entrance. Now it was almost empty. The waitress knew his name. She didn't ask questions. She just brought his usual black coffee, no sugar. On one of those nights, as he stared out the window, a familiar voice spoke behind him. Still chasing ghosts? He turned. Michael Lerner, the investigator, still wearing the same expression, composed, unreadable. Elias gestured to the seat across from him. They never stop running. Lerner sat down. Heller's case is closed. Officially, unofficially, he's consulting for a biotech firm overseas. They moved the trial data offshore before the arrest. The system doesn't punish men like him for long. Elias looked out the window again. Then nothing changed. Lerner hesitated. Not nothing. The law caught up with part of it. The rest, well, you can't legislate conscience. Elias almost smiled. You sound like me. Maybe I've been around you too long, Lerner said quietly. Then, after a pause, how's Ruiz? She's in Geneva, building something new, something clean, I hope. Does she still talk to you? Sometimes, Elias said. When she remembers I exist, Lerner nodded. Maybe that's mercy. In Geneva, Ana Ruiz was rebuilding her life one molecule at a time. Her new lab overlooked the lake glass walls, sterile light, and silence that wasn't judgmental, just empty. She had funding again, and a small team that looked at her like she was both legend and warning the doctor who had defied an empire and lived. But inside, she carried a weight that didn't fade. She still woke up some nights to the sound of alarms that weren't there. She still heard Daniel's voice, the patient who'd lived because of their defiance, thanking her in a whisper she couldn't forget. Sometimes she'd open his file just to look at the last entry. Tumor regression sustained. No recurrence detected. It was proof that what they'd done had mattered. But it was also proof of what it had cost. Elias and Anna had stopped talking regularly after the trial. There was nothing left to say that didn't reopen wounds. But one evening, an email arrived in his inbox. Subject: silence. There are nights I can still hear them. The machines, the beeps, the moments before everything broke. Does it ever stop? He read it twice before answering. No, but it becomes quieter. He didn't send it right away. He stared at the blinking cursor, then finally hit send. It was the first message between them in months. At the hospital, life went on. The new administration launched reforms, ethics committees, wellness programs, all the things that sounded good in press releases. But the people inside knew the truth. Nothing fixed what had already cracked. Nurses left. Young doctors quit medicine altogether. Some couldn't bear the politics. Others couldn't bear the silence. Those who stayed learned to adapt. They stopped asking questions. They filled out forms. They kept their heads down. The hospital was healing not from compassion, but from denial. One evening, Elias was asked to give a guest lecture to a new group of residents. The topic was responsibility in modern medicine. He stared at the invitation for a long time. Then he accepted. The auditorium was full. Young faces, bright eyes, people who still believed in clean lines between right and wrong. He began slowly. At some point, he said, you'll realize medicine isn't just about saving lives. It's about choosing which truth you can live with after you don't. The room was silent. He could feel their unease, their curiosity, their resistance. He continued, voice steady. There will come a moment when you know the rules aren't enough, when following them will cost someone their life, when breaking them will cost you yours. In that moment, you'll decide what kind of doctor you are, and you'll live with it forever. No applause, just quiet understanding. When it was over, a resident approached him, young, nervous. Dr. Ward, she said, would you do it again? The trial, the risk. He looked at her, really looked at her. The same idealism he once had, now staring back at him. Yes, he said, but I'd hoped to be braver about it. Later that night, he walked past the whisper ward again. The door was still sealed, but the light above it flickered faintly, like a heartbeat refusing to die. He stood there alone, the hum of the building echoing around him. Maybe ghosts didn't haunt places. Maybe they haunted people. He pressed his hand against the cold steel and whispered, I'm sorry. In Geneva, Anna received another email, this time from the hospital's new director. We're reopening the trial under full supervision, this time by the book. She stared at it for a long time. Then she forwarded it to Elias with a single line. "Maybe they finally learned." He replied minutes later. "Maybe we all did." Weeks passed. The city brightened with winter lights. Patients came and went. New lives began where others ended. Elias no longer carried his guilt like a wound. It had become a scar, tender, but part of him. He had learned to live with it, to teach from it, to let it remind him why he'd chosen this life in the first place. Anna found her own rhythm again. Her research thrived, clean, legitimate. She didn't chase redemption anymore. She chased understanding. That was enough. On the first anniversary of the trial, Elias stood on the hospital rooftop, looking out over the city. The wind was cold, sharp, alive. From up there, the building didn't look like a place of tragedy anymore. It looked like what it had always been, a collection of stories, some unfinished, some redeemed. He closed his eyes. The echoes were still there, soft and distant, but no longer heavy. They had done terrible things for the right reasons, and good things for reasons that would never be pure. That was medicine. That was life. He smiled faintly, whispered to the wind, "We were never heroes, just people who refused to look away." The city stretched beneath him, infinite, imperfect, alive. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace. The hospital had learned to breathe again, but not without scars. Spring arrived quietly, soft rain, pale sunlight through glass corridors, the faint smell of antiseptic and coffee. Life returned in fragments. Laughter from interns in the cafeteria, the sound of monitors in the ICU, the whisper of pages turning in the library. Yet beneath the new calm, something restless still moved. Elias Ward could feel it every day in the way people avoided certain conversations, in the way nurses looked away when the topic of the trial came up. It was as if the building had grown used to silence, too afraid to test what truth might sound like again. He understood. Silence was easier. But silence was also a decision. He was back in his office now, a smaller one, tucked behind the east wing, with a window overlooking the staff garden. It wasn't the same corner office he'd once occupied. He didn't want that one anymore. Too many ghosts in the paint. On his desk, a stack of letters waited. New research proposals, invitations to conferences, papers to review. None of it stirred him. Then, among the pile, a thin envelope caught his attention. No hospital logo, no return address. Just his name, written in neat handwriting. He opened it slowly. "Dr. Ward, I was one of Dr. Ruiz's patients in Geneva. I was told my therapy came from your research, from the one they called controversial. I don't know what you risked to make it possible, but I wanted you to know it worked. I'm alive because you didn't stop. Thank you. L.M." Elias read the letter twice. The words blurred. He set it down carefully, like it might vanish if he breathed too hard. Outside, sunlight spilled across the garden, faint, but real. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to close his eyes and feel something like relief. That evening, he met Lerner in the hospital cafeteria. The investigator had changed, grayer hair, slower movements, the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from seeing too much. "You look different," Elias said. "So do you," Lerner replied. Quieter, Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe I've run out of things to defend." Lerner stirred his coffee. "Don't mistake peace for surrender." They sat in silence for a while. The hum of the vending machines filled the air. Finally, Lerner said, "They're offering you the ethics chair." Elias looked up, surprised. "Me? You're the only one they trust to explain what happens when people stop caring about ethics." He laughed softly. "I'm not sure I believe in it anymore." "Then you're exactly the man for the job," Lerner said. "The ones who've bled for it always are." In Geneva, Ana Ruiz was facing her own decision. Her new lab had grown into something formidable, backed by international grants and pharmaceutical investors eager to turn her findings into a regulated therapy. The drug that had once been illegal was now rebranded, restructured, reborn. They wanted her to lead the next clinical phase. Full approval, global oversight, legal glory. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt nothing. At night, She'd walk along the lakeside, watching the city lights ripple across the water. Everything was so calm, so ordered, the opposite of what they'd lived through. And yet, she missed the chaos, the urgency, the sense that what she did mattered. Progress was cleaner now, but emptier. She received an email from Elias. Short, simple. Got a letter today. A patient lived. She stared at the message for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. Then she replied, "So the story didn't end with us." He answered almost instantly, "Maybe it never will." A month later, Anna returned to the hospital for the first time since the trial. She didn't warn anyone. She just appeared, hair shorter, expression calmer, dressed in the neutral tones of someone who had learned to hide everything behind composure. She found Elias in the garden, reading under a tree. "You still here?" she said. "Couldn't think of anywhere else to be." They stood for a moment, the silence between them familiar, almost comfortable. "I got your message," she said. "About the patient," Elias nodded. "Proof that we weren't completely wrong," Anna smiled faintly. "Or proof that miracles can survive our mistakes." They sat down on the bench, side by side. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "They offered me the new trial. Official this time." He turned to her. "Will you take it?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm afraid of what it would mean if it fails again." "Then don't think about failure," he said. "Think about what happens if it works." Anna looked at him. "You sound like the man I used to follow into disaster." He smiled. "And you sound like the woman who always pulled me out of it." Later that day, they walked through the hospital together. Every step echoed. Staff turned their heads, whispers again, but softer this time. Not accusation, recognition. The whisper ward's door was still sealed, but the new director had ordered it reopened for reconstruction. The space would be transformed into a new research unit, the Ward Ruiz Institute for Clinical Ethics. When Anna saw the plaque, she stopped. "They didn't ask us," she said quietly. "Would you have said yes?" She shook her head. "No, but I don't hate it," Elias smiled. Maybe that's progress. In the days that followed, life settled into rhythm again. Elias prepared for his new position. Anna prepared for her trial. They spoke often now, short calls, long silences, the language of people who didn't need words anymore. But something still gnawed at Elias. The letter from Geneva, the one from the patient. He kept reading it over and over. Not for the gratitude, but for the reminder. "I'm alive because you didn't stop." He realized then that every choice, every mistake, every act of defiance had been part of the same question. How far do you go to save someone who still believes in you? He didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure he ever would. The day Anna left for Geneva again, the hospital was bathed in late afternoon light. The sky outside was pale blue, fragile and open. She met Elias one last time before boarding her flight. They didn't talk about the past this time. They didn't apologize. "I'll send updates," she said. "You better," he replied. "You still owe me one miracle," she smiled. "You got one already. Don't be greedy," he laughed softly. "I'll settle for peace then," she nodded. "Peace, not silence," agreed. Then she was gone. Weeks later, Elias began his first lecture as chair of medical ethics. The auditorium was packed. He looked out over the sea of faces, new doctors, new hope, people who hadn't yet learned what he had. He started not with definitions or theories, but with a story. Once, he said, a group of doctors broke every rule to save one life. They lost everything: reputation, trust, sometimes themselves. But the life they saved changed everything that came after. The law didn't forgive them. The world didn't thank them. But they proved something simple. He paused. The room was silent. That doing what's right isn't the same as doing what's safe. He closed his notebook, stepped away from the podium, and added quietly, "And that difference, that's where the human part of medicine lives." The students didn't clap right away. They just listened, as if afraid to break whatever truth had just been spoken into the air. That night, Elias walked home through the quiet city. The hospital behind him glowed in the distance, not a monument to failure anymore, but to survival. He thought of Anna, of Daniel, of every ghost that had once haunted those walls. They were still there, but different now. Not reminders of loss, but of meaning. He stopped at a crosswalk, the red light washing over him like fire. Then he whispered into the night, "We did what we could," and for the first time, he believed it was enough. Time passed quietly, the way it always does when no one is watching. 5 years had gone by since the hospital's rebirth, since the trials, since the chaos that had nearly undone everything. The building had been renovated, its corridors brighter, its technology newer, its leadership younger. It no longer looked like the place that once carried ghosts, but ghosts don't care about paint or light. They live in memory, and memory lingers. Dr. Elias Ward had grown older. His hair was thinner, his movements slower, but his mind remained sharp. Students still filled his lectures, drawn by reputation and curiosity to see the man who had defied medicine itself and somehow survived it. They treated him like a myth. He hated that. He never wanted to be remembered for the scandal or the miracle that followed. He wanted to be remembered for being human, for making mistakes that others could learn from. But legends aren't built from humility, they're built from fire. The Ward Ruiz Institute for Clinical Ethics had become something bigger than anyone expected. It trained hundreds of doctors every year, ran international programs, and even advised on global health policies. On paper, it was a success story. In reality, it was a monument to contradiction, a place founded on a mistake that had saved lives. Elias often thought about that irony as he walked the halls lined with framed photos of graduates and ethical codes engraved in glass. The world had adopted their principles. Laws had changed. Medical ethics now had nuance, flexibility, empathy. But every so often, he'd catch himself wondering, had the world really changed? Or had it just learned to hide its compromises better? Ana Ruiz still lived in Geneva. The new therapy, the same one that had once broken every rule, was now approved in 12 countries. Thousands of patients had received it. Hundreds lived because of it. Her lab had grown into a small empire of research and hope. She appeared in interviews, conferences, documentaries. She had become the public face of redemption, the woman who turned scandal into salvation. But the truth, she knew, was far less clean. Late at night, she would still wake up to silence that wasn't empty, but waiting, the kind of silence that asks questions no one wants to answer. She would sit by her window, staring at the lake, and think about all the patients who hadn't survived. They called it success. She called it balanced life for life, hope for guilt. It had been almost 2 years since she'd spoken to Elias. They exchanged short emails, once in a while, about research or teaching or the occasional patient story. Nothing personal, nothing dangerous. Until one morning, a message arrived with no subject line. "Anna, they're calling it a new breakthrough. But it's not new. It's our work rewritten. Someone's using the same protocol under a different name." She read it 3 times. Then she opened the attached file. Trial Omega. Adaptive Immunotherapy Phase I. The formula was identical. A few molecules changed, a few data points rearranged just enough to claim originality. And the sponsoring company? A private biotech firm, founded by Raymond Heller. Anna felt her chest tighten. "He's back," she whispered. A week later, she flew to the city. The hospital looked different now, glass towers, new logos, endless efficiency. But it still smelled the same. Disinfectant, coffee, ghosts. She found Elias in the same garden, older now, sitting beneath the same tree where they'd last spoken years ago. When he saw her, he smiled, that tired, familiar smile that belonged to someone who'd stopped expecting peace. "I told you it never ends," he said. "And I told you to stop being right," she replied. He laughed softly. "You look good, so do you," she lied. They sat quietly for a while, watching the students walk past, young, idealistic, unscarred. Finally, she said, "It's him, Heller. He's using our research again. A new name, new investors, same pattern." Elias didn't seem surprised. "They don't invent anymore. They just recycle. We can stop him," she said. "Expose him again." He turned to her. And start it all over? The hearings, the press, the politics? You really want to go back to that? I want to finish it, Anna said quietly. Once and for all, that night, Elias couldn't sleep. He walked through the hospital alone, the hum of machines and soft beeps of monitors surrounding him like a heartbeat. He thought of Daniel, the first patient, of Mara, the wife who had begged him to act, of every decision that had brought him here. He knew Anna was right. Heller's shadow would keep returning as long as someone benefited from it, but part of him wondered whether fighting him again would change anything, or simply repeat the same tragedy in a different decade. Truth had weight and he was tired of carrying it. He stopped by the sealed door of the old Whisper ward. It had been converted into an archive, now a museum of the hospital's past. Behind the glass, photos and old equipment sat under soft light, labeled like artifacts from a forgotten war. He saw their names engraved on the wall. Dr. Elias Ward, Dr. Ana Ruiz, for courage in pursuit of truth. He stared at the plaque for a long time. Then he whispered, "Truth doesn't need heroes. It just needs survivors." In the morning, Anna met him in the old conference room, the same one where everything had fallen apart years ago. She had the files spread across the table. Trial data, funding routes, medical records. "This is the same pattern, Elias," she said. "Patients from low-income countries, unregistered trials, hidden complications. It's happening again, and they're using our name as proof of success." He rubbed his eyes. "We could go public," she nodded. "But it'll cost everything again." He looked at her. "Then maybe this time, we let it burn." She studied him carefully. "You're serious," he sighed. "Last time, we tried to save the system from itself. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe the system doesn't need saving." Anna shook her head. "And what about the patients? The ones who'll die waiting for someone brave enough to stop it?" That silenced him. She leaned forward. "I didn't come here to relive our ghosts, Elias. I came here to decide what kind of people we still are." That afternoon, the two of them walked into the hospital boardroom unannounced. Security hesitated but didn't stop them. Some faces were new, others familiar: younger doctors, administrators who had read about the scandal but never lived it. Anna placed the files on the table. "You should all see this," she said. Elias stood beside her, silent but steady. The new director frowned. "What is this?" "Proof that your partner organization, Heller's company, is using unauthorized clinical data from our research. He's running new trials outside regulation." Murmurs spread around the room. One of the board members asked, "Do you have evidence?" Anna nodded. "All of it. Patient records, transfers, financial TIs. It's all here." The director exchanged glances with his aides. "Dr. Ruiz, this is an extraordinary claim." Elias spoke for the first time. "So was the last one. You ignored it then. Don't make the same mistake again." The story broke 3 days later. Whistleblowers return, Heller under fire for illegal trials. The world reacted differently this time. No outrage, no chaos, just exhaustion, the collective sigh of a public too familiar with corruption. But inside the medical community, it was seismic. Funding froze, laws tightened, investigations opened across multiple countries, and for the first time, Elias and Anna weren't the ones on trial. They were witnesses. They had become what they once feared: the conscience of a profession that kept trying to forget itself. Months passed. The hearings concluded. Heller vanished again, swallowed by the world's short attention span. But something shifted, this time subtle, permanent. Students cited the Ward Ruiz principle in ethics exams. Hospitals revised their consent protocols. Research boards began asking harder questions. Truth had finally done what punishment never could. One evening, as the sun set behind the hospital, Elias and Anna stood together on the roof. The city stretched out below them, endless and alive. "We did it," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "No, we just told the truth again." She looked at him. "That's enough," he nodded. "For once, it is." They stood there in silence, the wind cold against their faces. Somewhere below, The hospital lights flickered on one by one small constellations against the fading sky. The world was still imperfect, still fragile, still human. But maybe that was the point. Truth wasn't a destination, it was a weight. And for the first time, they were learning how to carry it. The hospital had changed again. Buildings always do. Walls were repainted, departments renamed, protocols rewritten. Generations passed through its doors, new doctors, new patients, new mistakes waiting to be made. But beneath all of it, the soul of the place remained. The quiet hum of machinery, the soft echo of footsteps at dawn, the smell of disinfectant and rain on the glass. It was the same rhythm that had carried Elias Ward through most of his life, the rhythm of a world that never truly healed, only learned to keep going. He was old now, older than he ever thought he'd be. His hair had gone completely gray, his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee, but his eyes were still steady, sharp, and tired in equal measure. He had retired once briefly. It didn't last. Medicine wasn't something you left. It stayed in your bloodstream like an oath written into your cells. So he returned, not as a surgeon, not as a lecturer, but as something simpler, a mentor, a presence in the corridors. The old man people nodded to respectfully, half in reverence, half in pity. He didn't mind. Reverence fades. Pity at least feels human. Every Thursday morning, he visited the new Ward Ruiz Institute. It occupied an entire floor, now gleaming glass, quiet classrooms, the faint buzz of young ambition. He would walk slowly through the hallways, listening to the cadence of voices, the laughter, the debates. He never interrupted. He just watched. Sometimes a student would recognize him. "Dr. Ward," they'd say, mixed with shyness. "You're the reason I became a doctor." He always smiled politely. "Then make sure you're a better one." They laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Ana Ruiz returned only once a year for the symposium that bore their names. She was different now too. Her hair silvered at the edges, her face softened by time, her voice calmer, though it carried the same precision as always. She spoke about balance not just in chemistry, but in conscience. Medicine, she told the audience one year, isn't about perfection. It's about responsibility. Every decision carries a shadow. Learn to live with yours. The auditorium would fall silent after she spoke, not because people feared her, but because they understood. Elias always sat in the back row, watching her. When she finished, she'd find him in the hallway afterward, and they'd share the same quiet nod they'd been exchanging for decades. Words between them had become unnecessary. One autumn evening, Elias walked through the hospital gardens as the sun began to set. Leaves rustled against the pavement. The smell of rain lingered in the air. He paused by the statue near the entrance, a bronze figure of a doctor and a patient, hands almost touching. The plaque read, "For those who chose humanity over comfort." He'd seen it 100 times, but tonight he stopped longer than usual. Behind him, a voice spoke softly. "You hate it, don't you?" He turned. Ana was there, wrapped in a gray coat, smiling faintly. "I don't hate it," he said. "I just don't recognize it. They made you a hero, Elias. You were never going to recognize that." He smiled. "I was never one." She walked beside him, slow and deliberate. "No. You were something rare, consistent." They sat on a bench near the fountain. For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of water filled the silence. Finally, Ana said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't done it? If we'd followed the rules?" Elias thought about it. The faces of patients long gone. The hearings. The ruin. The redemption. "No," he said softly. "Because then we'd never know what rules were worth breaking." The wind picked up. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping lightly against the leaves. Ana pulled her coat tighter. "I'm leaving again tomorrow. Geneva's calling me back. There's a new project starting." "Of course there is," he said, smiling. "You never rest, neither do you," she replied. "You just pretend better." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You know me too well." She looked at him, really looked, the way people do when they know it might be the last time. "Take care of yourself, Elias." I will, he said. And you? I'll keep working until the noise stops, she said. He nodded. Then I guess I'll keep listening for it. They sat there until the rain became steady. Then she stood, brushed the water from her coat, and touched his shoulder gently. Goodbye. He wanted to say something profound, something to match the years they'd shared, the wars they'd fought, but all he said was, "See you next spring." She smiled. We'll see. Weeks passed. Winter came. The hospital moved on, as it always did. New cases, new students, new emergencies that erased old headlines. Elias still came in every morning, coffee in hand, walking the same path he had for 40 years. Until one morning, he didn't. He didn't show up for rounds, didn't answer his phone, didn't appear in the garden. They found him in his office sitting at his desk, head resting on folded arms, as if he'd simply fallen asleep mid-thought. A stack of lecture notes lay beside him unfinished. The last line he'd written was simple. Ethics begins where certainty ends. The news spread quietly. There were no reporters this time, no chaos, only stillness. Anna arrived from Geneva 3 days later. She walked through the familiar halls, now strangely empty, and entered his office. The air smelled faintly of ink and coffee. She sat in his chair, opened the notebook, and read the last line over and over. Then she took a pen from the desk and wrote beneath it, "And compassion is what remains after truth." She closed the notebook, tears she didn't expect stinging her eyes. At his memorial, the hospital gathered in the auditorium. Doctors, students, nurses, old friends. The air was thick with reverence and grief. Anna spoke last. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Elias Ward wasn't a perfect man. He made mistakes, sometimes catastrophic ones. But he never stopped asking what it meant to be human, and that question saved more lives than any cure. The silence that followed felt sacred. When the ceremony ended, she walked alone to the rooftop. The city spread beneath her, glowing softly through the fog. She could almost hear his voice in the wind. "We did what we could," she whispered back. "You did enough." Years later, long after both their names had become part of medical textbooks, a new student walked through the hospital garden and stopped by the bronze statue. He read the plaque and asked his professor, who were they? The professor smiled faintly. "Two doctors who broke the rules to remind us why they existed." The student nodded, thoughtful, then moved on. The garden was quiet again. The fountain still murmured. The light still fell the same way across the walls. Inside the hospital, a machine beeped softly, another life beginning, another chance being taken. And somewhere, beyond words, beyond memory, two voices lingered, not as ghosts, but as echoes of a promise that medicine had finally learned to keep.